Hello, this is Cynthia Sue Larson, and I'm with RealityShifters.com talking with you today about how good can the next 7 generations get. That's not just our generation, but it would be looking forward really optimistically. Something that we may not be doing much of with so much change happening in the world right now. But when we think about the children of this generation, the future children, 7 generations of future children, that may be hard for some of us to envision, but it has been the thought process of some of our indigenous ancestors, such as the Native American Iroquois. They had the constitutional, you can think of it as a constitutional intention and pretty much a requirement that any time consideration was given of any kind for deliberation, they said that we must consider the impact of our decisions on the next 7 generations. And that was not just unique to the Iroquois. It was actually a common thread and a common way of thinking at that time. I don't hear so much of it these days, but sometimes people at least mention children. When we think about long-term, it's so far ahead that even our chief technologists have difficulty anticipating where things might be headed with artificial intelligence, for example, robots. And that brings up this whole idea of where will augmented humans go. Now that's a subject that is controversial in the sense that it can be used for good, and people that need an artificial leg or arm or eye or organ definitely benefit from these technologies. So that's like a first generation of transhumanism. I was listening to a video, an interview conversation it was with Daniel, I'm trying to read his name, Estulin, and speaking with Greg Braden. And the two of them were talking about transhumanism as a concern, that there are 3 levels to transhumanism. Obviously, the first one, I just talked about it. It's physical augmentations for like false eyes, like a heartbeat monitor, or just a artificial heart, pacemaker, artificial legs, that kind of thing. Lots of people get titanium parts installed these days, at least in America, and that's the beginning of it. Where does it go next? Well, transhumanism possibly can augment human lifespans. Some of the transhumanists are keenly interested in longevity, especially the idea of immortality on a physical basis, not spiritual immortality, mind you, which I think a lot of people who are spiritual have been aware of for a long time. Now, this would be trying to keep a particular personality and body going for quite a long time. The other augmentations for phases 2 and 3, not sure which are which, but they would include physical, sensory, and cognitive improvements, as well as enhancements in psychic and mind-matter interaction capabilities. Now, that would also potentially allow control. So just because someone could be monitored for good, all these things obviously could break down or have bugs or defects, or even perhaps be sabotaged in some way. That could happen with anything, of course, but it seems like with augmentations, I think a lot of people have concerns because it's not clear that these things have been well tested and well proven yet. So there's always that. So transhumanists are envisioning this kind of future. We're seeing some of this with the mind pong. If you were looking at the first Neuralink and that monkey that Elon Musk's Neuralink company was helping those, the idea of long-term was to let this be utilized by humans, and I think it now is installed in a human somewhere. But originally, monkeys were utilized as the test subjects to show that a monkey could play a computer game like Pong, where a ball goes back and forth across the screen, and the monkey controls the paddle only with the mind. No mouse, no little control mechanism, just the mind. And that did seem successful, at least to the, I guess the people who were building those experiments thought they were successful enough to warrant it being installed in humans. And again, this would ideally be for people who are trapped inside their minds and don't have a way of reaching out or communicating. I'm just looking because there's a monarch butterfly in the garden as I'm talking. And I'm like, wow, I love it. It's not on camera, but it's just flying back and forth in circles. It's so beautiful. Okay, well, obviously, I prefer nature. I prefer messages that come to me that way. So if I'm able to do things with my mind, I'm going to be looking for ways to do them the way I write about in my new book, Mandela Effect and Its Society. So I'd be advocating quantum superpowers that are natural to us already, and we don't need further devices. But getting back into the transhumanism thing and thinking, how would this work for 7 generations going forward? Can we think about that for a minute? Well, if we look at the idea that with the extended lifespan, that changes a lot of things. It's not necessarily bad or good in and of itself, but then how does our society work when the elders, what is an elder? If people can live to be 200 or 300 or 400 years old, who are the elders? Who are the wise ones? Are they wise? Or have the control mechanisms for their psychological persona hampered or curbed them or clipped them or farmed them into some little pre-categorized safe zone? If so, this doesn't sound so good for 7 generations to me. Also, one criticism that people raise regarding transhumanism is the idea that if we lose mothers and fathers, yeah, exactly. If humans are farmed and the mothers and fathers aren't the family anymore, and instead we're growing up in some sort of a pod or something, what does that do to the next 7 generations? I'm asking a question I don't hear many transhumanists thinking or talking about. I'm asking, what does that do to 7 generations? I have no idea what the answer is to that either, but it doesn't necessarily sound that good. We've seen movies like The Matrix where people are growing in these little farms of pods, and if you've watched the Matrix movies, then you've seen that, and it looks nightmarish. Logan's Run is another one, which is a nightmarish apocalyptic vision of the future where people are, their lives are curtailed because there's not enough resource available for that many people to be free of disease, for example. So have we thought about how that plays out with transhumanism? I haven't seen all the long-term plans on this, and if they exist, it might be interesting, but I've got a kind of a cautious feeling, shall we call it. So when humans are ultimately looking at these matters and deciding how to employ technological enhancements, such as recalibrating the pleasure centers in the brain, which is something that is being considered right now. Supposedly this would assist people who are suffering from depression, anger, or addiction, and those around them might be spared a great deal of suffering from those emotional surges, rather than the people learning how to do that themselves. And maybe in some cases that would be helpful. I don't know. How does that play out in 7 generations? I wish we were asking these questions. Okay, another goal of interest to some transhumanists is that immortality thing. I talked about that. So growing old doesn't need to be just for sissies anymore. If it's easier, then what does that do to our character, to the wise elders? And so on and so forth. Human-like robots for the military, that starts getting kind of scary. Then we get into the Avatar movie kind of scenario, another apocalyptic kind of situation. In that movie, there was a direct contrast with people who are looking at the monarch butterflies and the trees all around us and the nature. And it seemed like there's a clear message in that movie as well, that nature seems to be superior in terms of having implicitly considered 7 generations forward, at least I think better than some of our technologies. So this is why I would say conscious agency and philosophy really matters. There are some people who are looking at these things and taking a look at what's the essential role of the struggle of light and dark and so forth. Some people are noticing right now in the last few years, we've seen, I'm going to hold up a book, we've seen an inversion. This is the book, The Inversion. It's by Kingsley Dennis, and I highly recommend it. It's a small book, it's not that big, but you can see I've already been marking all sorts of pages in it because it's that good. It's really excellent, and it shows a rationale for why things seem like so crazy right now, that the people we trust for medical care seem like they're causing a lot of medical harm. The people we trust for education seem like they're doing some harm as well. Our government leaders seem like they don't care about their populace, and so on and so forth. It just seems like, why is everything completely upside down? When we look into it, then we're seeing there is an age-old struggle, literally, between the light and the dark. And I think the book explains it better than I can. It would be a whole other video for me to do. Might get into it at some point. But then where does this, I want to go back to the 7 generational thing. Where does this transhumanism lead? Clearly, it seems like where it's going is this, it's kind of like a dominant paradigm of materialism, basically. To me, the transhumanists seem very fixated on what we see, what we sense, what's perceivable, what we call the observables, the measurables of this reality. And when we fixate that much on those things, typically, like when we've done the brain mapping and the DNA project, it was startling that the DNA mapped didn't seem to explain how we're thinking. Similarly, brain mapping has not shown where the center for memory resides, for example. We're not finding the answers we thought we'd find in material realms. It seems like every time we look, including in physics itself, we get to an inevitable spot where something that we thought was just a pure particle sometimes, in fact quite a lot of the time, exists entirely as a wave function. So it's very amorphous, and now you see it, now you don't, now it's everywhere. Where is it? Who knows? You can't measure it and know its precise location and direction at the same time. It's fundamentally enigmatic, and that seems the way nature really is fundamentally. So that's fascinating. And when we consider fixating too much on just the observable, just the particle component, are we really honoring the next 7 generations? Or will there be some kind of inevitable kickback where those aspects that have not been considered of the amorphous, emotional, energetic realm, if you want to call it that, because they've been ignored, they'll rear their head up, possibly in an ugly fashion, hopefully in a good, how good can it get fashion. But I think if we pay attention to it right from the start, we'll probably be in a better place. So we have the opportunity to see the hidden observer with quantum physics, to recognize the role that the observer plays in absolutely dictating what kind of results we're about to see. So when you make a choice to observe the double slit experiment and you've got the particle detector in one of the 2 slits, you'll be observing the action as if it was a particle going through that slit being measured or not measured, because you've narrowed it down and that's what you're expecting, so you get what you expect pretty much. In similar fashion, the complement of that would be if you're expecting, if you place your measurement device on the screen at the end, past the 2 double slits, then you'll be observing that the particles are behaving as if they're interfering with each other, even only when one particle at a time is fired through, 1 photon at a time is going through the 2 slits. You'll see a diffraction pattern that looks like when you throw 2 pebbles in a pond and you get those interference waves of destructive and constructive interference. So what is that telling us? It tells us quite a lot, actually, that it's at our own peril if we choose to get too fixated on the material world itself. And I think that's a big point. I probably should do another video and cover this better, but the Inversion book is really talking about that. And so if you think of good and evil, I don't know what your take on evil is, and feel free to leave your take on it in the comments, but when we look at that, it needs to be the way that we're choosing to make these observations. Are we choosing to expect something, the how good can it get side of things, or are we looking for problems? And our brains, some people say, are hardwired to focus on what's wrong. That was part of our survival defense mechanism. Now that we, as a human species, Homo sapiens means wise humans. We are wise, and we're being called to employ that wisdom in the way that we make these choices. When we consider the energetic, invisible wave function character of everything, and don't simply focus on the observables, this would be much more the indigenous way of considering for the next 7 generations, how good can it get? What are we doing to honor the future? And in that fashion, we can take a look at Rev Humanism, which I have spoken about in previous videos and blogs and so forth, and also in my new book. Rev Humanism is basically the indigenous way, and I'm just giving it a new name so it can stand side by side with transhumanism and give us the Homo sapiens wise human path forward, so that we are considering the relations we have with each other, with nature, and with our future generations as well. considering that we are the ones laying the groundwork for how everything else will go. How are we deciding to do that? Are we the heroes for future generations? Hopefully so. And so this is the bifurcation point that we've reached. I've talked about that before with the Hopi prophecy rock. It's actually written in stone. We've seen this in a lot of other world traditions and spiritual paths as well. It's a very old concept. It's even in the Bible. It's in most of our spiritual traditions that there will come a time when humans need to make that choice of how do we go forward. And I think if we stay focused on these 7 generations and think not just in terms of the material going to make me happy for right now, like that would be a very self-focused, kind of a greedy, vain, lazy, basically all the 7 sins. In other words, what does that sound like? It's the inversion. Yep, inversion. If we're doing that, probably we're not thinking about the 7 generations going forward. So it can be quite simple. If you're making choices that seem like, well, it's easy for me, it's lazy for me, it makes me look and feel good, that might be a problem. I just say, if you start noticing, like, this sounds like the 7 deadly sins and the hundreds of Buddhist torments, that should be like a whoop, whoop warning sign. So, word to the wise, think forward. Think of how good can it get. Be the hero for yourself, for others. It does pay off for you too. The rewards may not be the physical ones that you've been told that you should be doing based on, people who are on social media and so forth. But if you're watching my channel, you're probably a spiritual being, so probably that's not what you're doing anyway. And maybe this will give you a little insight into feeling good about the choices you're making at this very interesting time of human growth and expansion and evolution. Some people are still playing that game of getting the most toys, and that's happy trails. They're still believing the inverted experts, which, again, I recommend this book, Kingsley Dennis. So if you start thinking about who are you listening to, are these the experts that really have the best interests of the next 7 generations in mind? If so, great. And I certainly do, and I hope you do too. And until next time, let's all keep asking, how good can it get? And acknowledging each other as the wise, beautiful human beings we truly are. Love you so, so much. Take care.